Hello and welcome to Green on Purpose, a space where leadership, delivery and regeneration meet, shaping our future and building what lasts. Welcome back, and if this is the first time you're listening, I'm really glad you found your way here. I'm excited about this episode because it's close to home, and it's a real example of how small, practical decisions can make a difference that lasts. I want to share this project I've been involved in, not as a case study, but as a real example of how everyday delivery decisions shape what lasts. I'm sharing this project not because it's finished, but because it's still running. And that matters. Because so often we only talk about the work once it's been wrapped up, written up, and neatly labelled a failure or a success. This project sits somewhere else. It's been delivered, it's had real impact, and it's still evolving. So let's dive in, starting where it all began. Do you remember back in 2017, 2018, when more attention was being focused on the damages caused by single-use plastics and the need to reduce them? Images of oceans, wildlife, and overwhelmed waste systems were everywhere. And like many people at the time, I could really see the problem, but I really wasn't sure what to do about it. I wasn't interested in another campaign or a statement. I wanted to understand what solutions were actually out there to solve the issue. That curiosity is what led me to start exploring alternatives to single-use plastics, particularly sustainable plant-based materials that felt closer to how nature works. At first, I kept coming across the word biodegradable, but it quickly became clear that biodegradable can mean different things. Not everything labelled biodegradable breaks down in a useful way, and not everything disappears safely. That's when I learned about compostable packaging. Compostable packaging has to meet much stricter standards. It's tested to make sure it fully breaks down within a defined time frame and leaves no harmful residue behind, which isn't always true for biodegradable packaging. That distinction really mattered to me, because if the aim is to reduce environmental impact, what's left behind is just as important as what disappears. But packaging on its own still wasn't the real issue. The biggest problem with the single-use plastics is what happens after something is used. So I started looking at waste management systems, and that's when I came across the idea of a closed-loop system. So packaging made from plants gets collected after use, combined with food waste, and turned back into compost. So it goes back into the system instead of becoming waste. I found companies already doing this, gathered samples from across the world, and started testing what actually was possible. And because I like projects, I decided to see if I could take this beyond theory and try to make it work in a real-life situation, starting in my local community. So I approached the local college to ask if they'll consider moving to compostable packaging. It turned out the café manager was already thinking along the same lines. He wanted to reduce single-use plastics, not because it was fashionable, but because he understood the long-term environmental impact. He was thinking about his children and the kind of environment they would grow up in. That personal motivation mattered, because real change often starts when everyday decisions connect to long-term outcomes, not short-term targets. At the time, compostable packaging wasn't mainstream. It was more expensive, it wasn't widely trusted, and for many organizations, it still felt experimental. So the first delivery decision wasn't technical. It was whether to act before everything felt fully proven. Instead of waiting for certainty, we chose to run some pilot projects, small enough to manage, but real enough to surface the truth. That decision shaped everything that followed. I want to pause here because this is the point where projects like this often stall, not because people disagree with the idea, but because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. At this stage, there was a lot of unknowns. Would the packaging hold up day to day? Would staff accept it? Would customers question it? Would the cost become a problem? Waiting would have felt safer, but waiting would have also meant doing nothing and keeping the system exactly as it was. This is where delivery becomes a judgment call, not a checklist. And it's where well-intentioned sustainability ideas quietly stop. What often gets missed in sustainability projects is the translation work, turning good intent into something that people can relate to day. I wasn't just introducing new materials. I was asking people to trust a different system. That meant demonstrations, letting people handle packaging, testing it in real cafe conditions, talking to catering staff, procurement, facilities, and operations. This wasn't persuasion, it was confidence built through experience. I remember someone asking me a very simple question, but where does it actually go afterwards? That question mattered because it showed me the uncertainty wasn't about sustainability. It was about what happened next. That's when I realized this is the real work of delivery. This was the point where the college made a real decision. They agreed to replace the single-use plastic packaging in the cafe with compostable, plant-based alternatives. The sandwiches, the yogurt pots, the hot food containers, etc. And once that decision was made, things started to shift in very practical ways. This wasn't just symbolic. Product ranges had to change with the supplier. Ordering routines were adjusted. Frontline teams had to adapt how they worked day to day. And this is the moment where behavior really starts to change. Not because people are told to act differently, but because the system around them has changed. And it doesn't stop there. This project is still running. Some parts are in place, others still need to be done, but are moving forward slowly. But the direction hasn't changed. Sometimes the most important, useful question isn't what worked. It's what would happen if we hadn't done this. The same plastics would have still been in use. The same waste streams would still exist. And the same conversations wouldn't have happened. Change isn't only about improvement. It's also about what no longer stays stuck. By mid-2018, this had moved from curiosity into an actual project. I was excited. 18 months later, towards the end of 2019, we reviewed the data together. At that point, we calculated that about 250,000 single-use plastic items had been replaced with compostable packaging. And it's worth saying it's now January 2026. I recently got back in touch with the college and asked a simple question. Are you still using compostable packaging? And the answer was yes. That really mattered to me. I was genuinely proud that this had continued, quietly, well after go live. The number tells part of the story, but not the whole story. What we didn't measure was confidence, habits, or normalization. If something becomes normal, it no longer needs policing, and that's when change really sticks. From the beginning, the scope of this project was designed with a regenerative lens in mind. It wasn't just about replacing packaging. It looked at the whole system: packaging, food waste, composting, soil health, growing veggies for the cafe, and creating learning opportunities for students. Not just reducing harm, but strengthening the system over time. That's regeneration. This project didn't stop and it didn't fail. It continues in phases. Some elements took longer because of funding constraints, equipment availability, and legislative restrictions around composting food with packaging. These weren't delivery failures, these were system conditions. These conditions have evolved, which means the next phases can be revisited as the environment allows. When I say the project is still running, I don't mean it's stuck. I mean it's doing what regenerative work does, responding to conditions. Regenerative delivery doesn't pretend conditions won't change. It designs with them in mind. There's something I want to be clear about. This podcast isn't just about senior leaders, sustainability professionals. It's for anyone in an everyday leadership role. If you manage a team, if people look up to you, if you're a parent, a carer, a coach, a project lead, that's leadership. You don't need a title, you don't need permission. This project started because one person cared and acted. This project didn't fail, it succeeded. And the important lesson for all of us here is this. Delivery doesn't end at go live. It ends when the system no longer needs constant effort to hold the change together. That's when behaviour has really shifted. That's when the impact lasts. This is Sustainability Reimagined. What was one idea from this episode that really made you pause and think differently? Share it in the comments because I'd love to continue the conversation with you.